You are tuned in to the Post Route. Here is your host, W. Earl Kitchings.
Good evening, and welcome to the Post Route, the show where we dive deep into conversations with Black quarterbacks, both past and present. I'm your host, W. Earl Kitchings. This show is proudly brought to you by Quarterfi Back, the preeminent fraternity of Black quarterbacks and home of the prestigious BIP Memorial Trophy, the only award that honors both the top HBCU quarterback and the top black quarterback from high schools across the nation. We're thrilled to have you with us tonight. If you enjoy our content and want to support what we're doing here on the Post Route, please hit the button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell so you will never miss an episode. Join us live every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for more phenomenal conversations. Tonight is a very, very special night because it's probably going to be one of those rare shows where the person that we're going to talk about won't be with us because that person is passed. However, we have as our guest tonight a guy who's going to tell us a lot about this former quarterback who played at Marshall University. Let me just tell you a little bit about my guest tonight before we get into the show. Craig T. Greenlee is a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and a graduate of Raines High School, where he played the position of quarterback. He is a renowned journalist who's been covering sports for over 35 years, writing for newspapers in the state of North Carolina. He is the former sports editor of Upscale Magazine and the prestigious publications like Diverse Issues in High Education and Convergence magazines. Covering North Carolina A&T and Winston-Salem State as a sports beat writer, he masterfully chronicled the triumphs and tribulations of the game. He has written 3 books about the tragic incident that occurred for Marshall University back in November of 1970. His books titled are currently Marshall Ever After, and his first book title is titled November Ever After, a memoir of tragedy and triumph. Craig is also a former player for Marshall University from 1970 through 1971, and he was a member of the Thundering Herd team as a defensive back, where that team of more than 70 players perished in that tragic plane crash in 1970. Craig is a semi-retired reporter residing in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with his wife of 24 years, Cynthia. He also has 5 grandchildren and 7 grandchildren. Tonight, we will talk about Reggie Oliver, the quarterback who became the starter for the 1971, 72, and 73 Marshall teams, and who was characterized in the movie We Are Marshall. Please welcome my guest tonight, Craig T. Greenlee. Craig, welcome to the sports.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Very, very excited about what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Well, let me tell you, man, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time. And as much as I've looked forward to talking about that, I've been looking to just hearing you tell the stories about what happened, not only at Marshall, but the things that brought that community together and how it has just bonded so many people together over time, because the story is phenomenal. And I don't think we've ever witnessed anything like that before. So let's just kind of delve right into it and talk a little bit about this guy, Reggie Oliver from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I mean, here he was in the city where Alabama is known. Bear Bryant and that Crimson Tide was there, but he ends up in West Virginia. How does that happen?
Well, it's a strong allegiance to T-Town. He had several guys who had gone before him, 4 guys exactly. Larry Sanders, who I played with, a cornerback, along with Robert Van Horn, Freddie Wilson, and Joe Hood, who was considered one of the top, if not the top running back in the state of Alabama high school in 1968. And they had made a pact because these guys grew up together and they all went to the same high school. And
Right.
they decided that they were going to Marshall and they were going to turn Marshall into a football powerhouse.
Okay.
And actually, we were well on our way because a couple of years before Reggie arrived, we had a freshman team in '68 that had brothers from all over the country. And of course, everybody's grappling for scholarships and stuff like that. And there was so much talent that it began. We were undefeated, and that next season, 19 sophomores who were freshmen that first year were in the starting lineup. So
Wow.
you had a recruiting scandal that happened right after that spring in '69,
Okay.
and it decimated the program. And this was a year before the crash. So
Okay.
you're talking about a varsity program that had 82 players, a lot of talent on that team. But once the recruiting scandals took place, Marshall was busted for like 100 recruiting violations, kicked out of the conference and put on NC2A probation. And so Marshall was operating at a deficit personnel wise because of that. And when we came back, and of course we didn't have internet in those days, I didn't know anything about what was going on. I had earned a scholarship, so I had every reason to go back. But when I got there, come to find out that the 82 that we had in the spring was down to 41 at the beginning of preseason practice. So you carry that over into '69, and we had some mode of success, a lot better than what had been going on. And then the crash happened. And what most people don't realize about that team is that even though they were undermanned, they were so close to being much better than the record shows. In other words, the final record after the crash was 3-6. They could have easily been 7-2 because 4 of their losses were by 3.5 points on average. So either way, that could have gone a lot. The season could have gone a lot differently. So they weren't that far off the mark in spite of all of the different things they had to overcome, the different obstacles and personnel shortages and things like that. So when the crash happened, that was very devastating, obviously. But I always felt like you always pay homage to those who perished. But the story takes on a much different meaning and much more significant. Well, I shouldn't say it takes on a broader meaning, a more meaningful meaning, if that makes sense to you, because of what happened afterward in the aftermath. And that's where guys like Reggie come in, because he was able to come in even though he didn't have to. And he decided that, well, if it was good enough for them, then I'm going to stay and finish the job. And the fact that he was able to do what he did under those circumstances, in my opinion, I don't think anybody can equal, and that includes anybody that won Heisman trophies, because you're talking about starting over from scratch. You're talking about being put in an offense that really isn't your cup of tea, and you still were able to come out on top. And eventually they started to recognize, what he brought to the table in terms of his skill set. And the thing about it, back in those days, a lot of the black quarterbacks who were playing in college ball really were more like option type guys. Guys who could run, guys who could, there were some guys who could throw the ball. They were more like dual threats, that type of thing. But Reggie was a pure drop back passer. And I played against him that spring and a little bit during preseason of '71. And he had all the throws. He could make all the throws. He could throw deep. He could throw with touch. He wasn't that much of a runner, although he could run. But as a defender, I felt like, well, if he's running, that gives me an advantage. Because the last thing I want to see him do is throw the football, because he can sling it. He can sling it. There's no two ways about it. And but of course, like any quarterback, you got to have a few things going for you if you want to be successful. Number one, you got to have time to throw the football. Number two, you need a defense that's going to help you get the ball so you can stay in the game. And, the other part is that you just need a running game to help keep the heat off of you. He had none of that. that was, and that's not really a knock. That's just the fact that you had all these young kids coming in. And I mean, you're talking about guys who essentially were playing high school football the year before and going up against grown men, guys 21, 2 years old. There's a big difference between an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old.
Sure.
And I think anybody who's played ball understands that. So, but the fact that, these things happen, I think is really what makes the saga of Reggie Oliver really stand out, simply because of the things that he had to work with, and the fact that he had this kind of undefeatable spirit about him. About him. Actually, his nickname was Wolf, and of course, it didn't take long to figure out why they called him that, because he could talk. And it wasn't necessarily chatter, but he always, what I would call, be a strategic kind of trash talker. He would pick his spots, and he know exactly what to say to get under your skin. And he was a master at it. And I also felt like he needed to do that. He had to have a thick skin. He had to have that resolve, because there was so much that was going against him that said that, well, there's no way you're going to make anything out of this. But see, by the time Reggie finished, he had most of the school's passing record. They had finally recognized him as a drop back passer, so they didn't run nearly as much veer. But there was a reason why they did run the veer, and it was really because that's what teams typically run when they don't have as much talent. One, because they tend to be smaller and maybe a little more athletic, and they don't have to rely so much on brute strength. The other part of that is that the veer is very hard to defend a lot of times. So you might be able to stay competitive even though your talent level isn't quite the same as your opponent.
Gotcha. Well, Craig, because we went to the same high school here in Jacksonville, because at the time, you were at Rains, and when I got to Rains, after you had graduated, we were still under an all-black in an all-black school, where a segregated school system.
Right.
And when I looked up where Reggie went to school at Druid High School in Tuscaloosa, it was the same circumstances. And he was a guy that led his 68 football team to an undefeated year. They outscored opponents 265-52 with 5 shutouts. And the school had not been undefeated since 1937. So you're talking about 31 years since they had ever gone undefeated. But here, this guy and all his teammates come along and put together an awesome year. And that particular year, man, he played against one team where he threw for 340 yards and had 7 touchdowns, and led them to a 59-0 win over a school called R.B. Hudson. And then in a game against a school called Carver, he led them to a 45-6 victory. So to hear you say that he was a prototypical quarterback at that time says a lot about just what kind of athlete he truly was. And because when we were coming up, we only knew black high schools. We only knew that we played other black high schools, and we knew that, hey, we had a lot of talent on our teams. Our guys were big and strong and fast. And a lot of this was done without a weight room.
Exactly.
I mean, that's not it worked out of weight, but I think the conditioning and the training that coaches put guys through, I know with what my dad put you guys through, man, you were going to be in shape. You were going to be in
no
shape,
doubt.
Or you weren't going to be playing. But to read this information about him and his teammates at Druid, and to know what they went through, and to see that they made a decision to, hey, man, we're going to make this pact. We're going to go to this school together, and we're going to do some special things, since we're not really appreciated here at Alabama in Tuscaloosa, which is right here in our hometown. Hey, we'll go somewhere else and make it a fact of who we are and what we could do. And that's basically what they did. So I relate to this story so well, because it's a story you and I both lived, in the fact that, hey, man, you went to all-black high school. You played against all-black teams. That was just the way it was then, and that was what we knew. And we had a lot of pride and a lot of love and enjoyment in doing those games on Friday nights or Saturdays or Thursdays whenever we played them. So, this resonates with me, man. And I think, Craig, one of the things that, and you may not know this, but a couple of years ago, man, we honored the 1967 Reigns football team because I finally did the research and found that you guys won the 1967 FIAA state championship.
Oh, wow. Wow.
It was never recognized because there were some issues with that organization. But you guys went 8-1-1. You beat Howard of Ocala in the last game of the season, and up until that year, they had played championship football games to decide state champions for black high schools. But that year, which was the last year that organization existed, they didn't play a game. And part of the reason that you guys probably didn't get your due is because Dad being Dad, he didn't want people to feel that he was being biased because he was the president, although he was an executive director. He was the president of the FIAA, the Florida Interscholastic Athletic Association. So the recognition never got really done the way it should have, but I found an article, and this sports writer who became a sports information director and athletic director at FAMU had written an article and said, yeah, in the fall of 68, Howard of Ocala was going to have to play defending state champions, Reigns High School, who won the Class 2A in 1967. So it's documented. So once I found that, I made it a point, man, to make sure that 67 team got honored. So, hey, man, kudos to you and being a member of that team. And, man, it was special.
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was.
So to see that Reggie Oliver came up in that kind of environment and to know that, hey, man, he went to a program that recognized his talent. So he's there. You said, man, you didn't want to have to, you practice against him, but, man, you really dreaded that because he could make all the throws. And, what else were some of the particulars about being at Marshall at that time? Because like you said, some of your friends tease you about being in the mountains of West Virginia, kind of like the hillbilly part of the country, but yet you guys, and Craig, when you just said about how Marshall went through that time of being on probation, they kind of got the death penalty before SMU got the death penalty, if you really put it in that context.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that because it just pretty much wiped everything out. I mean, you're talking about, and some guys transferred, to other schools, and a lot of people didn't come back for one reason or another. But I mean, you go, and football is a game that you need depth. If you don't have depth, you're going to have issues. And
right.
So you're talking about a roster being cut in half. I mean, when I left to come back home in the spring of 69, spent the summer at home. I got back in August, and half the team was gone.
Right.
And so that's where we started the season with like 41, 42 players, which is insane, because if your starters get hurt, you're done. And it took a while to, I guess, overcome that, just the sheer lack of numbers, because numbers do bode well for you. You never know what diamonds in the rough may show up, but when you low numbers like that, it really puts you in a bind. So that's the one thing about the whole Marshall program or the whole Marshall story that I think is overlooked, that you had all these mountains to climb. And it took a while before, actually, I think Marshall didn't have a winning season until 1984. Right. I think it was. So it took like 14 years. But it did happen simply because somebody laid the groundwork. And see, that's the other part of Reggie's legacy that I think maybe unless people around Huntington know and people familiar with Marshall football know. But in terms of him being able to, and he talked about it a lot in his speech at the school. As a matter of fact, I think it was that spring of 2018, where he says, well, we just don't want to be forgotten. And we want folks to realize that, remember, before the bowl games, before Chad Pennington, before Randy Moss, before Byron Leftwich, before Michael Guyton, Michael Payton, who won the Payton Award in '91, a black quarterback, by the way. And remember the guys who laid the first bricks in the foundation. because without that, you don't have anything. And a lot of people may look at that and say, well, maybe. But at the same time, if you know anything about football and what it takes to establish a program, and considering where Marshall was at that time and where it wound up being later on, that's what makes the story as great as it is. Because long before Randy Moss and Chad Pennington and Byron Leftwich, you had a group that put some things together that continued to forge through in spite of difficulties, in spite of naysayers and all of that. Because what most people don't realize, or what they don't understand, or what they don't never been told, is that Marshall used to be a basketball school. Mike D'Antoni was a star basketball player at Marshall, the same Mike D'Antoni that's coaching in the NBA. Okay, but he wasn't even the best player on that team. Best player was a guy named Russell Lee that got drafted in 1972 by the Milwaukee Bucks, who had just won the NBA championship with Kareem and Oscar. They had 2 number 1 picks that year. One was the guy from Marshall, Russell Lee. The second one was some kid out of UMass called Julius Erving. That shows you how good they were. That's how good they were. They were good enough to where that one season they finished like they were ranked as high as number 8 in the country, and they wound up. I think they lost in the first round of the tournament, but they still wound up being number 12 in the final polls, and they haven't been that good since. So, but then the shift began where, I guess, people who make decisions decide which direction they want to go. And it took a while, but it happened. And so to me, that's what the essence of this story is. And it's a story that about perseverance and stick-to-itiveness and just plain grit that, well, hey, it doesn't look good now, but we're going to make it happen, because it won't happen if we don't do something about it. And that's kind of, I think, the attitude that a lot of the administrators had and decision makers had that enabled the program to go from where it was to where it is now.
Well, Craig, when I think about being at a Marshall University in West Virginia in the latter 60s, early 70s, how were the fans? How were the people in the community? How did they accept Black players coming to Marshall and being a part of that community and playing for that football team? Because, our perception would be you go to that kind of a rural state and you really, don't get a lot of love. And when I looked at the movie about Ernie Davis and how he got treated when Syracuse played West Virginia in West Virginia, then all you guys show up in the late 60s. What was the community like? How did they treat you guys? How did they feel about you guys being there at that time?
Well, I can only speak. I never had any. Well, I would say it was just more of a culture shock, just the fact that things were just different simply because you grew up in an all Black environment, and because how it was back in the day. I said, well, hey, you're in a neighborhood where you might have a high school principal that lives down the street from you, or the dentist, or a surgeon, around the corner, and things like that. But of course, now things are much different. But I would say that it was just a culture shock from the standpoint of, just not a lot of things that you're used to doing at home, depending on where you come from. And of course, Tuscaloosa is not that much, no different from Jacksonville, because it's both in the deep South. Right. But the thing is that there were some issues right before the crash that a lot of people don't like to talk about. But I feel like as a Black student back in that time, that you can't talk about one without and leave out the other. There was a major skirmish on campus between Blacks and whites, in which three guys were injured and taken to the hospital. Mm-hmm. And this was the day before the crash. And then you go from that. The city police had to be called in. We got word that the fraternity that was involved was going to extract revenge, that some folks were supposed to be coming in on campus that weekend, and So we're on the edge. Everybody's saying, well, hey, don't go anywhere by yourself, stay in a group. And then you go from that set of emotions to like maybe 27, 28 hours later, everybody that you know that came to that school to play ball is gone.
Right.
You know? And just that quickly. And that's a tremendous range of emotions to have to experience, you know, in such a short period of time, where you go to like feeling like you have to defend yourself by any means necessary to like, what are we going to do now? So many people gone. How are we going to get to all these different places? And what do we do? How do we, you know, go about consoling family members and things like that? So, you know, there was a lot to unpack there with that. But at the same time, one of the things that I always remember about that particular that November 13th and November 14th is that it was such a complete such a complete devastation that what happened the day before didn't even matter. It's like the fights never even happened.
Right.
You know, because it was like everybody was touched by it. Didn't matter whether you were male, female. Didn't matter whether you were what your heritage, your ethnic background. None of that really mattered. All that mattered is that everybody was just like, the weight of the grief was just heavy. And there's nowhere you could go to escape it. And that gives a real good indication, like, well, we may be different on the outside, but we all got hearts, we all got feelings and emotions, and we're hurting, you know. And you can't you can't colorize that, you know. It's like I say in the book, this was not a black thing, this was not a white thing, this was a death thing. And death, my friends, does not discriminate in the story.
No, not at all.
You know, and so that's the biggest lesson I think I got out of that, because it was, you know, all those different things, and you had, you know, factions and things like that, and you got to look at the time of history we're talking about, because that same year you had that incident that happened at Jackson State where all those kids got killed by the state troopers. That was months before. You also had the incident at Kent State where some National Guardsmen killed some people, you know, college students were killed. So you had a lot of those different kind of things going on. So it was a time that was very unique, a time that when you kind of put everything in this context, and it's like, and then you got this plane crash, and it's like, wow, what are we going to do now? And that's just kind of like, it's one thing to hear about it. It's another one. It's another thing entirely to have gone through that. And as a matter of fact, I probably haven't really dealt with a lot of things myself individually. That's why I'm going to do a third book about my personal journey about this, in terms of things that I haven't really discussed a whole lot of in previous books. But just the fact that it's a part of you. It never leaves you. You couldn't get rid of it if you wanted to, you know. And just the fact that you know, I know people who, and a lot of people went out to the crash sites that night, and when they asked me to go, I said, no, I'm not going. There's no way I'm going. I said, because I know that whatever I see, it's not going to ever leave me. And to be honest about it, I was scared of what I was going to see. You know, I didn't want to do that. So I stayed out, and I'm glad I did.
Okay. Well, Craig, hang tight, man. I'm going to take this quick break, man, and we're going to get back, and we're going to talk about Reggie Oliver going forward after the incident, and what adjustments the team and Reggie had to make, because he now got thrusted into being the starting quarterback. He became the man. So hang tight. I'm going to take this quick break, and we'll be right back.
All right.
This is the Post Route. I'm your host, Earl Kitchings, and joining me today, an extraordinary author, sports journalist, Mr. Craig T. Greenlee. Lived through that tragedy that happened to Marshall University's football team back in 1970. So we're going to pick up in a moment when we come back and talk with Craig about that. But before we do, I want you to know that, hey, this will be an excellent time for you to put your order in to get the book that has Mr. Reggie Oliver in it. He was one of the guys when I found out about him. He made the book because he was the first black quarterback at Marshall University back in the 1970, 71. So go to our website at quarter5back.com and put in your order for the book, The Forgotten QBs, the little known history, information, and statistics about black quarterbacks who played the game of American college football. Only $35. And if you go and order your book, we'll make sure you get it right back as quickly as we can. That's The Forgotten QBs, written by myself, W. Earl Kitchings. We are currently working on another book called The Forgotten Quarterbacks 2. So get you a copy of this one now, and we'll appreciate it. The other thing we want to remind you about, too, is because we are now into the third week of football season, hey, there's nothing more important than getting some gear so you look good. And the place to get that gear is called the Anthony Lawrence Collection, located in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This phenomenal business offers some of the great and wonderful apparel that you might want to choose to outfit yourself with on Saturdays. Nothing like looking good for a game or looking good for a tailgate or both. So if you haven't heard about them, check them out. The Anthony Lawrence Collection. You can reach them at anthonylawrencecollection.com and check out their gallery of apparel for all the HBCUs and other colleges throughout the country. The Anthony Lawrence Collection. Let them know you found out about them right here on the Post Route. And of course, if you have not become a member of our organization, Quarter Five Back, we always welcome you to take a moment out, send in your $44 to become a teammate, member of what we're doing here to make sure that we continue to preserve the legacies of black quarterbacks. That's what we do here at Quarter Five Back. We are the preeminent fraternity for black quarterbacks. So join us. $44 gets your teammate membership, and with that, you'll get a Quarter Five Back t-shirt. You'll get your membership letter and your decal that you can put on your car or any other place you want to. And if you don't want to do that, just send us $4.40 and become a supporter of Quarter Five Back. We appreciate all the help, and we appreciate you tuning in. As we said, subscribe or tune in to us every Monday night here on YouTube for more information about black quarterbacks who played this game of college football. Our guest tonight, esteemed sports writer and journalist, Mr. Craig T. Greenlee, telling us about Reggie Oliver, who we are posthumously recognizing tonight because he was the first black quarterback at Marshall. Craig, you're talking about, how everything went with the crash and what happened after that. But the next year you come back for the start of a new season. I know everybody's hearts are still weighing heavy thinking about that. But now Reggie Oliver is thrust into the position of being the starting quarterback. And based on that transition, what were some of the things you saw about Reggie that made him qualified and he stepped right into it and took on that leadership role? What were some of the things you saw about him that made him fit the bill for being a quarterback at Marshall?
Well, one of the things that I always felt like worked in Reggie's favor was his confidence. He had an unshakable confidence. Okay. And it was like it didn't really matter what people thought. He always felt like he had what it took to get the job done. The fact that he was able to get the starting quarterback position, even though the defense, the offense was not geared to his strengths, because Reggie was not an option quarterback. He could run it, but he was a pure drop back passer. And right. You're talking about if you're in a I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. I think if you're in a state of darkness and stuff, and you don't want a 25-watt bulb, you want a 1,000-watt bulb if you can get one. So that's the difference in what he was able to add once they kind of recognized what he could bring to the table with the skills that he had, with his natural skills. But he made it work. And okay. I think that's something that I don't think can ever be overlooked. The fact that it's almost like playing out of position. even though it's the same position, but it's not that was not his style. And the thing of it is that I think considering that Xavier game, which was the game that was a miracle of all miracles, because and that play, by the way, is still, I think, ranked number 83 on ESPN's top 100 college plays of all time. And the thing of it is the way it came together, and he was absolutely masterful in it. I'll be honest about it. I don't think most people didn't think that Marshall was going to win the game that year. And here it is, the first home game after the crash, like 10 months after the fact. And they come out, and it's like a minute 18 left. Xavier's up like 13-9. Marshall gets the ball about midfield, and Reggie goes to work. And his second game on the varsity, and he goes to work. And then they got down there to the 13-yard line, and he's just, people are going crazy because the clock is ticking down. We're talking about single digits, 9, 8. Reggie, get the playoff. He's sitting there watching everybody, waiting, making sure everybody's down. And as soon as the ball was snapped, the gun went off. And then so he did what he needed to do in terms of leading the defense to think one thing, and then the turning wheel through the screen pass to Terry Gardner, and the guy scored, and it was such a perfect play until he would have scored, whether it was touch football or flag football. Nobody touched him. And it was just, and that to me, that's always important, because in a season where a whole lot didn't go right, that went perfect. And that kind of, they won 2 games that year. But the fact of the matter that, things were so crazy after that, after the touchdown, that people just swarmed the fans. Just running out, just crazy. Like in the book, I say they hit the field like they were a herd of African wildebeest. Just coming out, and people stayed out there until like 7, 8 o'clock. Because of just I guess that's sort of the overflow from all the things that had happened the months before, and just that, that relief and that joy, and it just all came out. And that's something that will always cement his legacy because of just the circumstances, and the fact that he stayed there and continued to they didn't win, but they won 2 games his sophomore year, 2 games his junior year, and they went 4-7 his senior year, which they started showing, a little bit more improvement in terms of win and loss record. But the thing of it is, what I think is really more impressive to me is that in spite of playing with a lot less than a lot of his counterparts, he was still honorable mention All-American as a senior. And that was one of the reasons why he got the shot with the Sharks like he did, and one of the reasons why he was able to get his share of playing time, even though him and Eddie Mashan was splitting time, I think, at one point. But he was able to withstand. Quarterbacks don't always get the criticism, and the fact that him being a black quarterback, I think that back then, it was more of a question of like, well, can he really do this? Does he really have this? You used to always hear the knock on black quarterbacks. Well, they throw sidearm, or they're not big enough, and they're not this and not that. Well, this guy was the prototype. He was just, to me, he was like, well, Shaq Harris was probably very similar. He was kind of more of a pocket guy. Doug was the same way. They weren't really scramblers. They could run if they had to, but boy, they could throw a football. And the thing of it is that, but you have to have time to throw. And a lot of times, depending on your defense, depending on what the flow of the game is, you might be forced to throw when you don't really want to or need to, but you have to, and you wind up throwing those INTs, and then on the record it looks like one thing, but you have to look at the context of the game if you want to really know what happened. But it's just a marvelous thing in terms of his command of the game, his willingness to take a very difficult situation to say, look, I got this. Listen to me. I'm gonna take you there. I'll give you a story about this.
Yeah.
This happened the night of the crash. Well, I should say a 24-hour window after the crash. Now, the freshman team had a meeting that night, and they decided, of course, it's all emotional and everything, that, well, we're going to carry on, even though NC2A wouldn't let freshmen play varsity ball back then. They told them, they said, well, the guys decided, well, we're going to play this game. We were all going to play. They voted they're going to play this game. The following week, now this is the week after the crash now, on the following Saturday. Okay. And so everybody's, emotionally just taking over and things like that. The very next day, Mickey Jackson, who was an assistant coach at the time, who coached Archie Griffin, by the way, at Ohio State, he was at Marshall at the time, and he came back. He wasn't on the plane because he was on a scouting trip. So they didn't get back until late. So they went straight into the football office, and Reggie shows up at the office around 7 o'clock Sunday morning. And from what Mickey Jackson was saying, that Reggie told him, look, we're ready to go. I'm ready to take us out on the field and lead us to a win, because we owe it to the guys.
Right.
Those weren't his exact words, but I'm paraphrasing. And the thing of it is, right there, I think, and Mickey had said that, well, that to him told him everything he needed to know about Reggie. He was a leader. He was a leader. And the thing of it is, he didn't shy away from leadership. He didn't shy away from difficult situations. As a matter of fact, he enjoyed it, because he just wanted to say, well, yeah, see, y'all didn't think I could do that. That's the kind of personality that he had, but I think it served him well, considering the situation that he was in, and the fact that, and it still amazes me that he decided to stay in spite of that, but he had such a strong bond and loyalty to that pact that they had with his homies, that, hey, we're going to, we're going to finish this. And like he said in that last speech he had at Marshall, don't forget about the guys who laid the first bricks in the foundation.
Well, Reggie lost 3 of his childhood buddies.
4
in that 4. Okay.
Yeah.
So he had a lot of emotion. He wanted to do it, not just for all the other guys on the team, I can imagine, but for his guys he grew up with, because they all went there together, and they were going to do something special together, and that was not a part of the plan. I look at Reggie Oliver's stats while he was at Marshall. He played in 31 games. He threw for 2,886 yards and 13 touchdowns, with not the best talent. And not always as much talent as he needed, but he played and did more for Marshall and their program in those very critical years than anybody could ever think of. All the guys who played in Marshall at that time, my heart goes out to them, because they all played with emotion that was carrying. Sometimes you don't purge yourself from difficult things and emotions until later on, but for them to gut it out, man, and continue to play as hard as they could, man, that's a testimony to who those guys were and what it was all about. And they had a lot of reason for wanting to finish. As you said, Reggie wanted to finish. He didn't want to walk away. He wanted to finish, to honor not just the team, but especially his friends and childhood buddies from high school. So it's an amazing story, man. And thank God that you were there, and you've been able to put together a book, now 2 books, to talk about this, because it was an amazing story. So when I think about Reggie Oliver playing, and now his career at Marshall is over, you don't think about it until guys like us come together and talk about it. But Reggie was doing the same thing at Marshall that Eddie McShann was doing at Georgia Tech, becoming that first Black quarterback to set the foundation for guys to come behind them, because Eddie and Reggie basically were doing this the same time almost. And then for both of them to be playing for the Jacksonville Sharks of the Old World Football League. That might have been the first time in the history of pro football where you had two black quarterbacks on a pro team in that context. And
Yeah, I
that's
believe you're right. Yeah, I agree with that. I can agree with that.
so so I can imagine. And I remember watching some of the Sharks games, but it did not hit me during that time. Certainly didn't recognize a Reggie Oliver. Knew about it, Eddie McShann. Never saw him play football. Saw him play basketball. But to now look back and say, man, here are two guys that experienced some of the same things. Although Eddie did not finish from an all-black high school, he started at Lincoln High School in Gainesville, but he finished at Gainesville High. So he went from an all-black transition into a predominantly white high school and played quarterback there. But to go and be the first guy to be the black quarterback at Georgia Tech of all schools. Florida didn't even, he's right there in Florida's backyard. It's like Florida, Alabama. You got two drop back prototypical quarterbacks, and neither one of you wanted them, but then they end up coming back together and playing for a pro football team at the same time. Who scripts this stuff, Craig? Who scripts it for the life to just be like that? But what a phenomenal story for two guys to come together like that. And I'm sure they supported each other, man, when they were with the Sharks, man, like nobody's business, because they both experienced a lot.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see how things would have transpired had the league was able to stay afloat. You look back at that particular time in history, and again, this when things were beginning to change even at the pro level, because if you remember back in the early 70s, about the only thing we had aside from, I guess, Marlon Briscoe, I'm not sure what year that was that he played at Denver, but you had James Harris at the Rams, and you had Jefferson Street Joe Gilliam with Pittsburgh. And we know how all that turned out. At one point, they were playing so well. I remember seeing a cover story for Sports Illustrated that had two black quarterbacks on the front because they were playing so well. They were being predicted to wind up in the Super Bowl that year. Of course, it didn't turn out that way. But the way they were playing at that point in the season, it looked like they had as good a shot as anybody.
Well, the one thing that gets kind of lost in a lot of this, because of course Marlon Briscoe is the first guy to be recognized as the first black quarterback to play in a pro NFL setting. However, what gets lost in all this, Craig, is the fact that the guy who should have been before Marlon Briscoe never got a chance to play quarterback because they pushed him to wide receiver.
Eldridge Dickey.
Eldridge Dickey was the guy.
Yeah.
So had it not been for there being some biases, Eldridge Dickey would have been the guy before Marlon Briscoe. But Marlon, then James Harris, like you said, and then Jefferson Street Joe. But between Marlon and Jefferson Street, there were these two guys, Reggie Oliver, Eddie McShann. And that part of this story about black quarterbacks gets lost sometimes. But for those of us who know the stories because we lived it and because we are part of that time and that era, we have to tell the story as it really was and is, because, hey, you don't want folks to be like, well, I didn't know about this guy or this guy did that. No, man, there were some guys between who you know about and who you don't know about. And another guy that is lost in a lot of this between Doug and James Harris is a guy by the name of Matt Reed.
Okay, all right.
He played
late 70s, I believe.
He was in the mid-70s. As a matter of fact, he played for the Birmingham Vulcans in the World Football League.
Okay, all
right. Because he had finished. He came right behind James Harris at Grambling, and then he came right out of Grambling and went to the World Football League. That's where I saw him the first time. And I'm looking at a 6'5" quarterback. I'm like, oh my God, look at this guy. So you talk about prototypical guys. Here's Reggie. Here's Eddie. Here's Matt Reed right behind James Harris. So those guys in that era, I mean, we're talking about 5 guys: Marlon Briscoe, James Harris, Matt Reed, Eddie, and Reggie. Those 5 guys, man, the ones that you heard about was Marlon and Shaq. The other 3 guys, man, kind of got lost in the whole story.
Let's not forget about Chuck Ely.
Oh, now see, Chuck Ely, I called him the greatest college quarterback ever, Craig, because he never lost a game.
Yeah, I played against him.
Okay.
Yeah, I played
and
against him.
He can spin it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he you know, I mean, I never, the talk was that the Cleveland Browns were looking at him, but for some reason they just didn't want to. I guess it just wasn't time. So he wound up going to Canada and winning the Grey Cup, you know, which is and Reggie played against him too. So and I mean, and they didn't lose a game. They never lost.
They never lost, man. In his 3 years at Toledo, and he's been on the show. He was a guy that when I found out about what he had done, man, and when I started doing this thing about black quarterbacks, I made it a point to reach out to him when I found out how to get in touch with him. And he was gracious and came back, man, and we had a conversation. He's been on the show, man, and he's a member of this fraternity of black quarterbacks, man. But he's a fine gentleman, and he doesn't harbor any ill will about what happened. It happened the way it happened. That was life. But he finished 8th in the Heisman voting his senior year. So it is what it is. But we are guys who can tell these stories about guys who like, hey, man, Reggie Oliver, Eddie McShann, Chuck Ely. Okay, there were some guys who could have easily been quarterbacks in the league, but the league was not ready.
Yeah. Well, it's just a timing thing. I mean, and the fact that that they dedicated the street to Reggie is really amazing. And one story about that, I used to live right over there in front of the stadium.
Okay.
And I used to be able to watch games, from my bedroom, because the way things were designed. And so it's always interesting just to go back and to kind of remember, because the medical school, Marshall's Medical School, has that property now. But, the fact that, you kind of remember just visually, where everything was, and the fact that, this is where he played, and the fact that, before Michael Payton, before Byron Leftwich, there was Reggie Oliver, and I think that says a lot. That says a lot.
Stands on his shoulders.
Yeah,
everybody stands on his shoulders.
That says a lot. And I think what happens with a lot of us who were there at the time, a lot of times we look at it, oh, that was back in the day, but we were living history. These were people that did all this stuff was going on. We were there at that game when Reggie cemented his legacy with that game against Xavier, 10 months after the crash. Yeah. And the thing about it that really is a shame, and I got to put this in there, with Warner Brothers, they missed a golden opportunity to take a great story and tell it in such a way where it doesn't distort what actually happened.
Gotcha.
And the thing of it is, they made it sound like Reggie kind of like lucked up and he scrambled in the movie, but he was not a scrambling quarterback. Yeah. And the thing about it is that if they just go with exactly the way the play happened and how everything was precision and all of that, they could have done, and I go into this, I give my own rendition of what they should have done. Of course, I could do that because I wrote the book. But anyway, the whole point is that the way things came down, and I can still see it because I was in that end zone, the play coming right at me, and it's like I got surround sound, jumbotron, and big screen, decades before it even came into existence. And I could see the play develop. I could see it develop. And it's kind of like, that was like, and like I said earlier, for that to happen in a season where it didn't a whole lot go right, that was like the toast. That was like, you just have to take your hands off and just stand up and just clap your hands. That's just all there is to that.
Okay. Well, Craig, we only got a couple more minutes. Talk a little bit about your book and how people can get a copy of it.
Well, you can get, my first book is November Ever After. And I got so much feedback from the first one that I did a sequel called Marshall Ever After. And there's a lot of personal things in there in terms of just relationships, how people coped, how things just happen in terms of their lives and stuff. Uh, Give you a quick story. One co-ed, Janice Cooley, she dated the star running back. Um, Years after the crash, she ran into his best friend in high school in a job interview, and they didn't know about it until afterwards. And as they conversed, and she started asking questions, and come to find out that this guy, his best friend in high school, knew everything about Artie's family, Art Harris.
Right.
He knew
Right.
everything about Artie, and that's just kind of like. And this is 34 years after the fact. You know,
Wow.
Reggie was involved in terms of Larry Sanders had a girlfriend. They were pretty serious. She was a black homecoming queen. Reggie decided that he could sense that if it wasn't done right, that she could wind up in serious deep depression. So
Gotcha.
what he did, he took it upon himself to go to Macy's room with his date and insist that they come out with him and his date.
Okay.
And Macy was that really did a lot for her. And
Sure.
the fact that he did this because he felt like, well, you just can't sit in your room. You just can't, even though that's what you want to do. But to give her some sense of normalcy, and to think about another person in that way, I think says another thing about Reggie that maybe a lot of people don't know. So
Okay.
it's all in the book. Marshall Ever After, November Ever After. You can find them on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere that books are sold.
Okay.
And I'm the one that wrote it, and I'm glad I did, and I was blessed because I think God is leading me in this way. So I thank you. Look, man, I appreciate this. You don't know how I really do. It was your idea. I didn't think about this. You did. But I thank you for having me on and being able to share what I've shared up to this point.
Well, Craig, thank you. The first thing I'm going to say before I kind of close out is you know this one word and you know what it means. And, you know, if nobody else knows it, but you are Ichiban, brother. You are Ichiban.
All right, we all are. We're supposed to be.
Okay. But tonight, my guest has been sports journalist and writer Craig T. Greenlee. And tonight, we want to posthumously welcome Reggie Oliver into the fraternity of black quarterbacks known as quarterback back. And Craig, you have made this possible, man. So thank you very much. Hey, go out and get a copy of his book, Marshall Forever or November Forever. Craig T. Greenlee, thank you so very much, brother. And you keep writing, man, because we want to keep reading.
All right, then. I appreciate it.
Okay, buddy. Take care.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, that was an amazing story tonight and interview because that guy has gone through a lot with that particular story, but I'm so glad he has written the books and can tell the story so that it helps some people, you know, get through a difficult time, but it also honors those young men and their families who passed and who survived that tragic incident in November 1970. Craig T. Greenlee, sports journalist and author. Remember the book's name, Marshall Forever, November Forever. Go to Amazon or go to any bookstore and find you a copy of it. That's going to about do it for me tonight here from the Post Route. I want to thank my crew who make things possible. Will Relaford, our chief photographer. Kemal Lazir, our social media director, putting out some great stuff. If you aren't following us on Instagram, you need to follow us at _5_back and subscribe because you'll be just amazed at what things he's producing on our social media platform on Instagram. And of course, this show is not possible without the #1 wing person that a guy could have to do a show, Ms. Ronleen Kennedy, our producer and director. Thank you so very much to our team of professionals, and thank you for keeping us in the mix of doing what we're doing, keeping us scoring points for the guys. So until next Monday night here on the Post Route Show, I'm your host, W. Earl Kitchings, and as we say here on the Post Route, go deep, go for the bomb. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next Monday.